Margaret Hayes had been serving coffee and comfort at Rosie's diner for 23 years. At 58, her hands knew every plate, every cup, every smile that came through those glass doors. The morning shift was her favorite, when the sunlight painted gold, stripes across the checkered floor, and the regulars arrived like clockwork. She was wiping down the counter when the call came through on the diner's phone. It was Susan from the blood bank across the street. "Maggie, we have an emergency. Car accident victim at County Hospital. Type AB negative. We're critically short." Margaret's hand went to her chest. AB negative. Her rare blood type had always made her feel special, like she was meant for something beyond pouring coffee. "I'll be right there," she said, already untying her apron. Her manager, old Frank, waved her off before she could explain. 23 years earned you that kind of trust. The blood bank was quiet that Tuesday afternoon. Margaret settled into the donation chair, watching her blood flow through the clear tube. She thought about the stranger whose life hung in the balance. Someone's father, perhaps. Someone's son. "You're doing a wonderful thing," the nurse said, pressing a cookie into her hand afterward. "He would have died without this." Margaret went back to her shift, her arm slightly sore, her heart full. She never asked for a name. Some kindnesses, she believed, were meant to be anonymous gifts to the universe. 3 weeks passed. The autumn leaves were turning amber and gold, reminding Margaret of the seasons that had cycled through her life. Her daughter was grown now, teaching school in Oregon. Her late husband, Tom, had been gone 5 years. The diner had become her family, the regulars, the early birds, the late-night travelers. She was arranging fresh flowers in a vase by the window when the bell above the door chimed. A man walked in, mid-60s, distinguished in a way that spoke of boardrooms and careful choices. His silver hair was neatly combed, and despite the expensive suit, there was something gentle in his eyes. Behind him stood a younger woman in nursing scrubs, blonde and professional. Margaret grabbed 2 menus and smiled. "Good morning. Sit anywhere you'd like." The man chose a booth by the window, the same spot where Margaret's husband used to read his morning paper. Something about that made her eyes sting, but she blinked it away. "Coffee to start?" she asked, arriving at their table with the pot already in hand. "Please," the man said. His voice was warm, cultured. "And Margaret, may I call you Margaret?" She paused, the coffee pot hovering. "Have we met?" "Not properly. My name is Richard Calloway. This is Claire, my private nurse." He gestured to the woman beside him. 3 weeks ago, you donated blood to a stranger. That stranger was me." The coffee pot trembled slightly in Margaret's hand. She set it down carefully on the table. How did you find me?" "The blood bank couldn't release your information, of course. But my assistant is resourceful. We learned you worked nearby and, well," he smiled. "There are only so many diners within walking distance." Margaret slid into the booth across from them, suddenly needing to sit. "You didn't have to track me down. I was happy to help." "That's precisely why I needed to find you," Richard said quietly. "In my world, Margaret, people rarely do things without expecting something in return. You saved my life and went back to serving breakfast. No fanfare, no recognition. Just kindness." The morning sunlight caught the steam rising from the coffee cups, creating small halos. Margaret folded her hands on the table, the same hands that had held her husband's in his final days, that had braided her daughter's hair, that had poured 1,000,000 cups of coffee. "My mama always said we're put on this earth to help each other," she said simply. "Doesn't matter if it's a cup of coffee or a pint of blood. We all need each other." Richard's eyes glistened. "Your mother was a wise woman." "She was a waitress, too," Margaret smiled. "Worked till she was 75. Said retirement was for people who didn't love what they did." "May I ask you something?" Richard leaned forward. "Do you love it? After 23 years? Margaret looked around the diner, at Frank flipping pancakes, at the worn red vinyl booths, at the regulars who'd become friends. "Every single day. These folks, they're my purpose. Everybody needs somewhere they feel seen, you know? Where somebody remembers they take their eggs scrambled or asks about their grandson's baseball game. The world's so big and busy, sometimes people just need a small place where they matter." Claire, the nurse, wiped her eyes discreetly. Richard nodded slowly, as if Margaret had just solved an equation he'd been working on for years. "I built a company from nothing," he said. "Made more money than 10 generations could spend. Lost my wife to cancer 4 years ago. Since then, I've been adrift, going through motions. Then came the accident. In that hospital bed, I made a promise to myself. If I survived, I'd find a way to matter again. Not as a billionaire, just as a person." Margaret reached across the table and patted his hand, the gesture as natural as breathing. "You matter now, Richard." "You always did. I want to do something meaningful with what time I have left," he continued. "And meeting you, seeing how you touch lives with simple kindness, it showed me what's been missing." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table between them. Margaret looked at it but didn't touch it. "Inside is a proposal," Richard said. "I want to establish a foundation. The Margaret Hayes Foundation for Everyday Kindness. It would fund small community spaces, diners, libraries, senior centers, places where people can connect, where they matter, and I'd like you to help me run it. Not as an employee, as a partner. Your wisdom, your heart, that's what this needs." Margaret sat very still, the weight of the offer settling over her like snow. "Richard, I'm just a waitress." "No," he said firmly. "You're a person who understands that the smallest acts of kindness are the ones that save us. You gave me blood, but more than that, you gave me a reason to believe there's still goodness in the world that asks for nothing back." The diner seemed to hold its breath. Frank had stopped flipping pancakes. Even the clock seemed to tick more softly. "I'd still work here," Margaret said finally. "A few days a week at least. This place, these people—" "Of course," Richard smiled. "That's non-negotiable. We'll work around your schedule." Margaret opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a check, enough to erase every worry she'd carried since Tom died, and a letter of intent outlining the Foundation's mission. But what made her cry were the words handwritten at the bottom. "In gratitude for a life saved by generosity, and a soul saved by grace. With deepest respect, Richard." Claire handed her a tissue. Frank appeared with fresh coffee. The morning regulars had somehow learned what was happening, and old Mrs. Chen from the corner booth called out, "You deserve this, Maggie." Margaret looked at Richard through tears. "Why me? Really?" "Because when I was dying in that car," he said, his own voice thick with emotion, "I prayed for a second chance. Not just to live, but to matter, to do something good. You gave me that blood, Margaret, but you also showed me what goodness looks like. It looks like showing up. It looks like kindness without agenda. It looks like a woman who works 23 years in a diner and still treats every customer like they're precious." She folded the check and put it back in the envelope. "Let me think about the foundation." "But Richard, you're welcome here anytime. First cup of coffee's always free for family." His face transformed with a smile that erased decades. "I'd like that very much." 6 months later, the Margaret Hayes Foundation opened its first community center in a neighborhood that had lost its gathering places. Margaret split her time between the diner and the foundation, bringing the same gentle wisdom to both. Richard came to the diner every Tuesday morning, always sitting in the same booth. They'd talk about the foundation over coffee, but mostly they'd talk about life, about loss and love, about the seasons that change us, about the people who leave fingerprints on our souls. One autumn morning, as golden light painted the checkered floor, Richard looked up from his coffee and said, "You know what you gave me, Margaret? Besides blood, what's that? A reason to wake up grateful. A second chance at being human." Margaret refilled his cup and smiled. "That's what we're all here for, Richard. To remind each other we matter. One cup of coffee at a time." Outside, the leaves fell like blessings. Inside, kindness poured warm and steady as morning light.